watching the Screaming Fish here, people, and once again I'm here for you guys with yet another video, and this time, in this video, we are taking a look at the supposedly long-awaited 5th installment of the Transformers franchise, Transformers: The Last Knight. Yay! They made a 5th one, and now we've all got to sit through it, and it's probably going to be terrible. Yay! The first Transformers movie is a movie I really enjoy. Yes, it is riddled with flaws, has questionable acting, and a plot that's a little too straightforward for my liking, but Transformers is one of those very rare movies that I can enjoy for what it is. The effects are incredible, the action was entertaining, and the film managed to pace itself just fast enough for me to never get bored or frustrated about how overly long it actually is. To put it short, I enjoy the first movie for what it is. The other movies in this franchise, on the other hand, are a different story. Unfortunately, the sequels have not been so satisfying. Revenge of the Fallen was a stinking pile of regurgitated garbage, Dark of the Moon was boring and forgettable minus the entertaining third act, which just about puts it on top of number 2, and I will admit, Age of Extinction I consider to be an improvement over the other 2 sequels that came before it, but it still left much to be desired. I haven't been a particularly huge fan of this somehow billion-dollar franchise, but I still keep coming back to these movies for the same reason loads of other people do. To see if they get any better, to see if Michael Bay will ever learn from his mistakes, and every single time I've done that so far, I've been wrong. And in some cases, very, very wrong. However, the trailers for Transformers Last Night did actually impress me quite a bit. I was actually convinced that the filmmakers had actually gone back and learned from their mistakes, and the cast, which included Laura Haddock, Mark Wahlberg, and Anthony Hopkins, got me really excited to see this movie. And I thought that they may actually produce a truly great Transformers movie this time. And did they do exactly that? No. Not even close. This movie was so bad that when I reached the halfway point in this movie, I found myself thinking almost aloud in front of the other 50 or so people in that room with me, just what the hell am I doing with my life? And by the time the film ended, my mind was blown in all the worst possible ways in an attempt to figure out how even Michael Bay of all people looked at this script and thought, this is gonna be a great movie. Yup. There is my immediate thoughts on this movie. It was absolutely awful. I literally don't even know where to begin with this one. There are so many problems with this movie that I can talk about, and as much as I don't want to review this movie at all, I know that there are a few of you who really want to hear my thoughts on this movie, so let's just get on with it. Let's start with the plot. If you mix a nice batch of unnecessarily convoluted military side plots, a threat that has the potential to destroy the world as we know it, an ancient artifact / weapon that holds the key to Earth's survival that everyone's trying to get their hands on, unsuspecting human characters that get caught in the mix, and the gigantic battle for Earth's survival that takes place right at the end of the movie, then what you have cooked up for your audience to feast their eyes on is basically the exact same movie we got the last 4 times. These movies have become so incredibly predictable and repetitive with their storytelling that you can actually see the next scene coming from a mile away, and now it's become incredibly obvious that the writers clearly don't know where to take this franchise other than using the same 3-act structure they have been using for the past 10 years, and the worst part is that none of it makes any kind of sense no matter what context you try to imagine it in. The continuity errors are just non-stop, and I'm not just talking about the editing, which I'll talk more about later, but even the continuity of the franchise as a whole. The idea that the Transformers have been on Earth since the Dark Ages contradicts everything that came before this film. If they were around in the Dark Ages and have been on Earth since then why aren't they common knowledge in the first movie? I know it's portrayed as this secret history of Transformers on Earth, but it's never explained as to how this has been kept a secret for hundreds of years despite there being millions of eyewitnesses. The way this film ties the Transformers mythology to the tale of King Arthur actually made me laugh out loud. The idea is just so stupid. The item that they have to find that they can use to save the world is Merlin's staff, which was given to him by a Transformer of all things. In the first movie, it was a cube. In the second one, it was a matrix. In the third one, it was a bunch of pillars. In the fourth one, it was a seed. And in this movie, the artifact that they can use to save the world from an ever-growing threat is basically a stick. This movie also has so many side plots that it quickly becomes quite possibly the most convoluted movie I'll see all year. I very nearly said aloud, what is going on? I even heard the guy who was sitting next to me in the theatre say that out loud. However, the thing that annoys me the most about the plot of this movie is that I can't really call this a Transformers movie when so much of the focus is concentrated on the human characters. And it's because of that incredibly questionable creative decision that basically none of the Transformers get any form of characterization. There are literally huge sections of this movie with virtually no Transformers to be seen, and the human characters aren't even that interesting. Mark Wahlberg as Cade Yeager is about as interesting as opening up a Star Wars sticker book thinking you're going to get amazing stickers before you realise that they look like garbage. Yes, it's nice to have a lead that doesn't just scream in nearly every scene, but there really isn't anything about this character that makes him any more likeable or interesting than he was in Part 4. He's just a very generic human character trying way too hard to be a badass. Laura Haddock, who plays the character with the most British name I have ever heard, Vivian Wembley, yes, I am reading that right, annoyed the hell out of me. Her performance was incredibly bland, and I found myself cringing every time they tried to make her seem funny. Anthony Hopkins' character is the living definition of an exposition machine. Most of his screen time consists of long expository scenes on how the Transformers have been on Earth for thousands of years. His performance in this movie is just so over the top that I found myself laughing unintentionally at not only how bad his performance was, but also how bad the writing is, and oh my god, the writing is atrocious, and it really does show in the dialogue. The dialogue is hilariously bad. It is some of the worst I've ever heard, of all time, and unfortunately Anthony Hopkins gets the worst of it. The comedy falls flat on every level. Yup, you heard me, all that racially insensitive and ridiculous humour from the last 4 movies is back, and it's just as bad as it was the first 4 times. The Transformers characters range from racial stereotypes to underdeveloped side characters. If you're excited to see Optimus Prime kick ass all the way through this movie, then you, my friend, are out of luck because he is barely in this movie. In fact, he's absent from 90% of this movie, and that plot point where he goes evil, which is the main focusing point of the marketing campaign, is barely explored. I was expecting it to be some sort of clever twist on the mythology, but unfortunately it wasn't, and we only get to see 5 minutes of that before it's tossed aside like it meant nothing. The Transformers get basically no form of characterization, so you feel nothing when one of them bites the dust. And I don't think I'm the only one who was incredibly angry that they basically turned Hot Rod, one of the best characters from the original animated movie, into a racial stereotype of a Frenchman. It just frustrates me that they took an iconic character from the original animated movie and not only made him look almost exactly like Bumblebee for some reason, but turned him into a racial stereotype. That just blows my mind. The best thing I can really say about the Transformers in this movie is that I can at least take one look at them and think, that looks real. And granted, from a visual standpoint, the effects team have really outdone themselves this time. I would even say that in terms of visual effects, this is probably the best one, but that can't even come close to saving the rest of this movie. Whenever there's an action sequence on in this movie, it shows a few seconds of the Transformers kicking ass before it cuts right back to the human characters who are running around and screaming. And I don't want to see that. I want to see the Transformers actually beating the heck out of each other, and not Mark Wahlberg trying to be a badass. The action on the other hand isn't really that great though, whether it's Transformers beating each other up or humans running around. It doesn't really stick out to me. There's a lot of action in this movie, but there was not a single sequence that made me think that was absolutely incredible. The action basically consists of explosions, robots flying everywhere, human characters running around screaming, and weird looking shapes that would just pop up on screen and then would get blown up by the Transformers. And there are so many explosions in this movie that there were times where I actually couldn't tell what the hell was going on. And the editing. Oh my days, the editing. This movie has some of the worst editing I've experienced in quite some time. The film just jumps between multiple locations and subplots, making it feel incredibly meandering and messy, and the continuity errors are just countless. There are so many scenes where a Transformer would be stood behind someone, and in the next shot that Transformer would be gone, vanished, into thin air. And other times, it rapidly cuts between wide shots and close-ups of a character's face, like a pinball machine. And the way it cuts from location to location is just disorientating. The camera work just isn't that great either. There are a lot of sweeping camera angles and wide shots that don't really add anything to the overall experience of the movie. My biggest fault with this movie is the amount of influence from other movies this movie contains, in particular Star Wars. For starters, the poster looks very similar to the poster for Star Wars Episode 8. There are robots in this movie that look like TIE fighters. we have a character that is an obvious attempt to cash in on the popularity of C-3PO. They even tried to make a joke out of it earlier in the movie, but A, it falls flat like the rest of the comedy, and B, it's impossible not to notice the similarities between the character and C-3PO, and there's even a knockoff of BB-8 from The Force Awakens that unfortunately is just so much less appealing as a character. There's even a scene where a bunch of expendable and completely irrelevant Transformers are introduced with their own title cards, which is very clearly ripped straight from Suicide Squad. If you force me to say something remotely positive about Transformers Last Night, I will say this. The action near the end of this movie is somewhat entertaining. There are some pretty cool shots of the Transformers kicking ass, and there's a brief but pretty cool sequence set in World War II that was cool to see. And Isabella Mona, I apologize if I said her name wrong, did not give a terrible performance. I would even say that she was the only one actually trying to do a good job here, and make the best she could out of what can only be described as a horribly written script. But the same cannot be said for the sound. This movie is loud, and not in a good way. The sound design is so jarring and ear-piercing that I've found myself flinching on a couple of occasions, and the music is borderline generic and forgettable. They also tried to set up this huge cinematic universe for the Transformers franchise, and minus that one scene in World War II, I just didn't like the way they were going about it. Because the way this movie introduces that idea tells me that most of the future spin-offs and sequels are going to be set on Earth, and pretty much nowhere else. And that brings me to my final complaint with Transformers The Last Night. We are now 5 films into this franchise, and we are still setting these movies on Earth. Why can't they just take this franchise into space or something, and turn it into some kind of space opera? That would be cool, right? To lay down my final thoughts on Transformers The Last Night, I'll say this. This movie is a weird combination of being filled with what seems like years of expository dialogue, and being unbelievably convoluted while at the same time managing to be hilariously predictable and both simplistic and boring. Yes, it's a good looking movie from a visual standpoint, but that's really the only thing this movie has going for it. I did not enjoy this movie. I thought it was quite terrible actually, and unfortunately there's a good chance that this may be the worst movie I've seen all year. If you like this kind of stuff, then just go see it. You'll have a good time. Heck, you'll like it just as much as my brother did. But as for the rest of you, stay the heck away from this steaming hot pile of trash. It is god-awful. Yeah, that was my review of Transformers The Last Night. You probably enjoyed it. I don't know, to be honest. That is the worst movie I've seen all year. I know in my review, I said it's probably the worst movie I've seen all year, but I don't care. I'm gonna make up my mind straight up here now. Transformers The Last Night is the worst movie I've seen all year, and it might quite possibly be the worst movie of 2017 by the time this year ends. That is my prediction. I might be wrong, but I'm just gonna make that prediction. And the worst part is, they're gonna keep making more of them, because these movies are just so successful. And oh my god, they're going to keep making more of them. There's going to be a Bumblebee spin-off, which I'm kind of excited for, but still, there's a good chance it's going to be awful. Same goes for 6 whenever they get directed for that, and 7 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, because they're just going to keep making more of them! I just had a rage quit about how much I don't want to see more Transformers movies. I'm keeping it in. Anyway guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And while you're at it, please check out the previous video. That was probably my Injustice 2 video, if I remember correctly. And yeah, thanks for watching. I mean, as for the other Transformers movies that are inevitably coming out, I'm probably gonna see them anyway, because I'm sad. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. Y'all come back now.